Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Frobo Trust webinar. My name's Sasha Powell, and I'm here representing the Frobo Trust. But I'm with you for just a few seconds to introduce my colleague over in Mercy College, Dr. Eric Martone, who is joining us from New York. Eric, are you there?
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Eric. I wanted to welcome you very warmly to this joint webinar. I wondered if you'd like to say a few words yourself.
Well, sure, thank you. So I'm the interim dean of the School of Education at Mercy College. My name is Eric Martone, and I'm also editor of the Global Education Review. This event started from a two-part issue that is coming out in our journal. Part one is already out. Part two will be coming out shortly. And our journal is a themed journal, and this is something new for us. I mean, technically every issue, so they have a theme. It could be used as a starting point for an event such as this, and where the research that was part of this issue gets shared in a different way and in a broader spectrum. So we're really excited about the opportunity to co-sponsor this event with the Frobo Trust, and we hope you really enjoy it, and it's very productive. And if you like, come and check out some of the articles that were behind this on our journal's website. This is an open access journal, so it's free and available to the public.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful in that sense that everyone can access those articles. And thank you so much for co-hosting the event with us and for producing such a wonderful journal. Thank you, Eric. And now I'm going to hand over to our chair for the event, Dr. Teresa Aslanyan, who's in Norway. Hi, Teresa. Can I hand over to you to introduce our event?
Yes, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am happy to see you. Right now, we're at 250 participants. I expect the number will only grow. I know we're all excited to hear the views and perspectives of these 8 educators and researchers who've contributed to 8 of the contributors of these 2 special issues. And those who want to know more about our contributors can read the biographies in the delegate package that everyone has received, and hopefully read their articles that are available in the first issue that has been published and is coming, as Eric said, soon. Very rich and intriguing thoughts about Froebel's place in early childhood education today, our lives and children's lives. So I look forward to introducing each of these unique thinkers and contributors. We will begin with Lynne McNair, who's coming to us from Scotland, and each will answer their particular view on why does Froebel matter in the 21st century. Lynne.
Thank you, Teresa. And what a question, really. You could go in so many different directions, and I thought long and hard about what is it that is really important and why does Froebel matter in the 21st century. And I think that because of the time that we have, I'm going to just choose one, and I'm going to speak about just roughly about his principles, the principles that he espoused. And I'm not obviously going to cover them all, but I think that is what is really important to me, and that's what, because I speak both as an academic but also as a practitioner, and I see Froebel's principles in practice every day, and hear practitioners discussing and debating them and constantly returning to them. So if I was to think what, for me, what matters, I would definitely keep coming back to that. And if I think about childhood as a period in its own right, for example, I mean, in many ways, when you think about that one principle that Froebel constructed all those years ago, it's so relevant today. And we think about the child that's a being or a becoming, all those kind of wonderful debates we have in academia about the child as present now and not the future. And Froebel was thinking about that all those years ago. And I think especially in relation to things like my transition research, I think a lot about that particular principle of Froebel's. I also think that every day he brought us the one about, and I mean, we could all debate this, but about children as unique individuals. And I was listening in a conversation just on Monday with a group of practitioners who were talking about a child with disabilities who was starting to be labelled because of their particular disability. And this was challenging the practitioners because they were actually seeing the richness of the child, and they were returning to Froebel's principles in order to say, but this is a unique individual. And I just thought, you know, they were just so rich, so eloquent and so articulate about Froebel's principles. So why do they matter? Well, they keep bringing us back to kind of these really important debates, and you know, everyone's involved, so practitioners, parents, the children themselves, which is wonderful. I also wanted just to say that I think that when we think about Froebel, we think about the importance of relationships, and we think about the ways that practitioners are responsive to children, and the way that they're present and they're lingering when they're observing children. And I think that he really made us wake up to think about our relationships we have with children, that adults are not always right. And this morning I had a PhD student meeting, and he was talking about the Anthropocene, and his PhD is funded by the Frobo Trust, and it was really interesting the way that the PhD supervisor, the other one, said, you know, Frobo, what he brought us took us right to the Anthropocene and ecology and the way that everything interconnects. And I just thought that was really worthy of bringing up today. The other thing for me is about the enactment of those principles, that children have the right to choose, take control, create, explore, and learning not being linear. And we all are battling against standardisation, I think, in various different countries. And I think that Froebel helps us, I think, when we think about you know, each stage being that stage, challenging the kind of neoliberal discourses. And Lily talked, quoting Froebel, talked about the equilibrium within and between everything that exists. And I think we can really think about that when we're thinking about children's learning. And very importantly, I think what comes out of that is a particular view of children. And I think that, why does he matter? Because he supported this particular view. And so the child being active, thoughtful, a listened to person, a thought about, self-motivated and autonomous learner was really important. And Teresa's popped up, which means I'm kind of just about out of time. And I'd just like to say, can I leave you with a quote? Because he gave us loads of wonderful quotations. Let us live for our children, then their lives will bring us joy and peace. And when sorry, I'm getting all excited because Teresa's there, and we shall ourselves begin to grow in wisdom. And I think for me that is one of the most significant things that Froebel gave us. He made us look at ourselves and our relationships with children. Thank you, Teresa. I hope I never went over.
Thank you, Lynn. But can you say that one more time? Because I think that quote,
Yes, absolutely. I'll say it more eloquently, hopefully.
We have time.
Let us live for our children, then their lives will bring us joy and peace, and we shall ourselves begin to grow in wisdom. I love it. So
thank you very much.
Just wanted to share that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Lynn. I want to remind everyone we have question and answer opportunities at the end. So if you get any thoughts or questions you want to pose to any of the speakers, please write it, and after our final speaker, I will choose as many as I can to pose to the speakers. Now I want to welcome from Norway, Jan-Erik Johansson. Welcome. You can take off your microphone.
Oh, here it comes. Today, I'd like to share 3 points about Froebel. Firstly, Froebel is necessary in order to understand early childhood education. And secondly, the importance of his play theory. And thirdly, the use of his curriculum when discussing early childhood education today. My first argument is that Froebel's work from the 1840s is necessary in order to understand early childhood education. He built upon Rousseau, Pestalozzi, and contemporary natural science. Physical punishment was forbidden, which of course was something new. Froebel aimed at the child's preconceptions of the world around, which would become mature concepts later in school. And he had no interest in teaching school subjects and didn't support laissez-faire maturation or authoritarian models. However, in practice, the problem remains to balance the roles of teacher and child. Froebel's followers played important roles worldwide, but his original play theory was forgotten. So this first point is that early childhood education is as old as elementary school and is based upon an advanced theory. Secondly, Froebel's theory of play is complex and may be used in the didactic research today. In 1959, the German educationist Wolfgang Klafki developed his categorical Bildung, influenced by Froebel. Klafki aims at balancing the material teaching of content with children's formal personal development through his categorical Bildung. This is when the child opens itself to the world and at the same time, the worlds open itself to the child, which I think is the way we do things all the time. The child's new knowledge is supported and reflected in interaction with the adult. And this second point is that Klafki opens the door to Froebel's forgotten play theory. Thirdly, Froebel's curriculum is not a blueprint or copy. However, it's an interesting frame of reference when discussing early childhood education models. His curriculum consists of didactics, content, and the principle for organization of content. His play didactics aims at the child's activity and interaction with the world and staff, as in categorical Bildung. Content is threefold: play materials, as is gifts and occupations, then activities outside in garden and nature, and last, group play. So we can ask some questions today. What has happened to Froebel's play didactics and materials? Is there any place for mathematics and natural science? Which is the role of garden and nature? And is group play with music, song, and dance used to support children's understanding of everyday life and nature? Which principle guides the structure of daily work? Do we find Froebel's idea of balanced contradictions to be mediated in use? Or is the daily program fragmented with a random content and structure? So this point is that Froebel's curriculum is important when asking, what do we do today and why? So at last, to summarize my 3 points: the fundamental contributions of Froebel and Froebelians in early childhood education. Secondly, Wolfgang Klafki's development of Froebel's play theory. And at last, Froebel's curriculum as a basis for discussion of early childhood education today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Erik. Wow, that was exactly on the It's fascinating. I love that Froebel as necessary to understand early childhood education today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are now going to travel over the North Sea to England. Christina Macrae.
Hi.
Welcome.
So, as a researcher of early childhood interested in recent post-human theorizing, Froebel's thinking matters in the 21st century precisely because of his passionate belief that matter does indeed matter. There's a vitalist and materialist metaphysical thread in his thinking concerned with the interconnected nature of inner and outer worlds. This ardently non-dualist thought is one that I want to run with, not to reclaim his thinking as foundational in relation to early childhood, but rather to return to often overlooked and sometimes suppressed aspects of his thought that could offer us ways to think differently, as well as to live differently in the age of the Anthropocene and its attendant climate crisis. Whilst recognizing that Froebel was often philosophically contrary and inconsistent, I am excited when I explore and excavate, extend some of the genealogies that can be traced in his thinking. In the 20th century, alongside the influence of Piaget and Vygotsky, Froebelian inflected pedagogies have been known for focusing on play as a vehicle of child development and for child-centered education. And yet, ironically for me, in the context of the precarity of the 21st century, I find that Froebel helps me to decenter the child. In the West, the 20th century is largely shaped by the capital flows accumulated through colonialism, fueled by industry. Entangled with this is how childhood is constructed and the ways that cognitive and then social constructivist theories of learning gained an ascendancy. Associated with this complicated entanglement has been a modernist privileging of child development as a form of distinct, of linear and stage-like growth, and with this privileging of language as a form of knowledge constituted through the exceptionality of the human as a social being. Froebel's writings before the German Industrial Revolution were in part focused on a humanist understanding of education and the pursuit of knowledge as a uniquely rational human endeavor. And yet at the same time, he combined this with a strongly held belief in the vitality of the material world, in the unitary growth of bodies as such, including animal, vegetable, and mineral. He rejected demarcated stages of development and early verbal instruction. And these are aspects of his thinking that have often been previously, over the last century, cast as anachronistic. But in the context of the current crisis, they might seem less fringe. And in the face of an accelerated and intensifying economic focus on the individual child, I think they carry a renewed relevance and urgency. Froebel had a conviction in felt sense and intuition as a form of pre-knowing and a belief in the universal power of the material world as a life force itself. And I think these might be potent ideas to rethink childhood as productively relational with our world in its widest sense. His belief in connectedness and in what we as adults might learn if we attend more closely to children's engagements with the small things can perhaps help us to reframe our understanding of worldly knowledge in more relational and less anthropocentric ways. That's me.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you for reminding us of that side of Froebel that maybe is, as you say, has been less spoken of. We now have Ceci Maron-Puntarelli from Indiana, USA, Indiana. Welcome, Ceci.
Thank you. I'm joined by Dan Casper.
Yeah, and my role today is really just to sort of introduce and support my co-author, friend and colleague, Ceci Maron-Puntarelli. And Ceci and I began writing our article considering some of Froebel's enduring contributions to early childhood education and wanting to do so with a level of sensitivity about how his ideas have been translated and interpreted over time and also across cultures. We started generating some questions, first of which, what does Froebel's theory of childhood education mean today? And more specifically, in what ways might Froebel recognize his ideas in contemporary early childhood classrooms? What is the relationship between dominant discourses of, say, for example, developmentally appropriate practice and Froebel's educational vision? We also then wanted to consider, what does remembering Froebel's contributions contribute to contemporary discourses of early childhood policy and practice, especially amid the global educational reform movement that's encroaching upon early childhood education? How might Froebel respond to our current accountability-based educational policy environment? So to address these questions, we imagined an experienced director of a modern, developmentally appropriate early childhood center in the Midwestern United States, Ceci, leading, we imagined her leading Froebel on a tour of a center like the one that she formerly directed. I'll turn that, I'll turn it over to Ceci.
Thanks, Dan. So in our creating this imaginary tour, one of the things that we really thought about was the fact that we see Froebel in so many of the things that we see in the American classrooms today. The developmentally appropriate practices that we try, that guide us and our curriculum, the encouragement of children's active engagement with the environment and with the natural world, and also along with the pedagogical practices that are supported by National Association for Education of Young Children, which is our accrediting body here in the United States. What we found as a practitioner who spent many years taking families on tours of our programs is that Froebel really gives what we need to defend the basic practices that we do every day. The practices that are centered on play, relationship, exploration, and hands-on learning can all be defended when we look at Froebel and his work and his unique response to young children. When we describe the activities that one finds typically in a classroom, that's child-centered and play-based, we can make connections to the basic ideas that are still relevant and important today. Ideas that are counter to this obsession for standardization and high-stakes accountability. We consider the elements of early childhood curriculum that foster and support creativity, connection, communing with nature and others, unity, self-activity, play, and hands-on learning. So as a practitioner for many years, I was often tasked with using everyday language that a layperson can interpret to share what's going on in our classrooms and why it's of use. And one of the things that when I consider the relevance of Froebel for the 21st century, I find that his work supports exactly what we're doing in the classrooms. It's almost like I can say, we aren't just making this up. This all has a basis for what we're doing, both historically and in the contemporary American practices. So we work to convey his continued relevance for practitioners defending his practices, their practices, and it's a great defense against policies and conditions that attempt to ignore this unique stage of life and education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, Ceci and Daniel. I want to remind everyone that we can ask questions. We want questions or comments to each of our speakers. We are going back to England. Tansy Watts is our next speaker. Welcome, Tansy.
Thank you. I think I'm going to echo some of the comments that have already been made in what I'm going to talk about now. and suggesting that Froebel can offer us a perspective that aligns with our need for sustainability thinking now in education, and can perhaps offer us a resource to draw on in shaping daily accessible educational ideas and enacting this. And central to this is Froebel's holistic orientation to a vision of life as a whole, but an understanding of this as expressive through its diverse forms and processes. And it's this that framed his understanding that our path of learning is essentially through the process of discovering connections. Froebel's kindergarten practices have been historically influential on early education and its development at a global scale. And we can find many parallels between current good practice and Froebel's ideas, but we can also see differences, and this can offer us some space to reflect now. We currently focus on the development of the individual child, but Froebel encouraged us to see the vitality of the whole learning context as important, and for this to give value to the forming of relationships within education. We currently recognise the importance of partnership working with parents, with communities, making connections with local environments and cultures. And Froebel can encourage us to see these networks of relationships as a great source of strength, and perhaps that we can place greater emphasis on both drawing from these and contributing to these in ongoing and interactive ways. There's growing recognition of the importance of children's nature access for a holistic sense of well-being, and we can see this as primarily occurring in outdoor spaces and in natural environments. But Froebel encourages us to remember that we too are expressive of nature through ourselves, and that these experiences are also joined by all of our meaning-making processes. And this makes all educational activity an opportunity to support a sense of our relationship with surrounding life. Therefore, our choice of resources, the activities they support, the conversations they promote, and the songs and the stories that we share together. There are multiple opportunities to instill a sense of belonging. We recognise children's learning as holistic and through all of their domains of being, and Froebel can draw a connection between this and our ongoing state. We are always holistic beings with a full relational capacity, and it is this that can frame both child and adult-led learning as important for the other. The child can draw our attention to details in the surroundings that we've forgotten to notice, perhaps some big questions about the ways that they are. While adults can draw children towards an appreciation of the place of those details within a whole context through our capacity for abstract knowledge. These can all be equally valued as our rich connective potential and can embed us as whole beings into a sense of our place within and as part of the whole. Play remains central. We recognise this as children's holistic learning, but Froebel also suggests that play is a relational language through which our adult life of experience and the child's fresh eyes can meet. Play can offer a sense of life's wholeness within our individual experience, and it's a state of give and take with our surroundings and a flow of ideas that this can support. And through this, we might feel, as Froebel suggested, joy, peace, contentment, inner and outer rest, and peace with the world. A shift to an education of sustainability can be daunting, but Froebel might offer us a path through reconsidering the role of our familiar early years practices. He can offer us a language to connect that tension between a whole global context and our local experiences and activities, and our sense of our individual experience and our place within the whole. This is in terms of our potential to embed ourselves in a sense of belonging and the support that this can offer for our capacity to care. And that's for ourselves, for our surroundings, and a sense through all of these connections and relationships of a sense of the interconnection between them. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tansy. Our next speaker is Maria Cooper from New Zealand. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Teresa, and thank you to the speakers before me. Tēnā koutou katoa from Aotearoa, New Zealand. In the spirit of Froebel's principle of unity and connectedness, I come to this dialogue with my international colleagues on my shoulders. Jean Rockall, Mary Benson McMullen, Kerry Sue, and your very own Sasha Powell. The views I want to share today reflect insights gained from our research project on pedagogies of care for 1-year-olds, our youngest citizens. And the project was carried out in the 4 countries of New Zealand, the USA, Hong Kong, and England. So for us, Froebel matters for so many reasons, as has been shared, and I focus on 2 of these. First, at a time when infants were seen as innocent blank slates, Froebel's ideas about very young children were radical, daring, and yet transformational. Froebelian philosophy positions infants not as passive bystanders, but as active, relational, and connected beings who can contribute to their own lives and the lives of others. Such a strengths-based image of the infant reveals Froebel's moral commitment to infancy and the first years, which suggests to us an honouring of babyhood in its own right. This strengths-based image also aligns with the early childhood curriculum of New Zealand, Te Whāreki, and its Māori Indigenous view that all children are born with mana, a sense of spiritual power and prestige. The teacher's role here is to nurture and protect this mana by prioritising each child's connections with people, place, and things from birth. Froebel's following and guiding teacher takes on a similar role in nurturing the child's spirituality and connectedness in their lives from birth. We believe that infants can be more autonomous, agentic, and valued when the teachers they become connected to learn to slow down, reflect on, and think with others about the significance of Froebelian philosophy for their localized pedagogies of care. This potential gain for infants is reason enough for why Froebel matters. And second for us, Froebel's ideas underpin what it means to be human. Likely driven by his own unfortunate childhood experiences, Froebel's work encourages a closeness and reciprocity between adult and child. This idea needs to be enduring in this constantly changing world. A return to his ideas reminds us of what makes us human, our relationality, the idea that who we are and what we do is always in relation to another. So in caring for the infant, Froebelian philosophy motivates us to care for and about them while looking out for and taking care of their relationships with others. Moreover, Froebel's holistic view of the child as one part of a much bigger whole, which is reflective of unity, reminds us to pay attention to the child in context. And honouring the whole child in this way means recognising the social and cultural conditions in which children are immersed from birth. It also requires us to trust that with gentle guidance, even infants can garner the support they need from those around them. The 1-year-olds in our project showed us this developing competence in the outdoors, in the playroom, and even on the nappy change table. Overall, Froebelian philosophy prompts us to think about what binds us together as a human race and to never take our relationships for granted. And this is why Froebel matters. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Lovely. Our next speaker is Helge Wasmuth from, actually, coming to us at least from New York.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. And thanks to everyone who already spoke. It was really interesting to listen to all of you because I had been wondering before this webinar what other people would say. Would they say the same that I'm saying, or would they say something very different? And I think we could see that there were some threads that somehow connect how we think about Froebel and why we think that Froebel still matters today. And so for me as a historian who has been doing some research on Froebel's educational theory, his philosophy, and also about his life, it's a question I have to answer quite often. So why does it matter? Why does Froebel still matter? Why do I do this work? Why should we read someone who was really difficult to understand, as some of you said before, who was ambiguous in his thinking, sometimes even incomprehensible, and really had some kind of thinking that's very foreign for us today because it was so different than we think about the world and how we think about education quite often. So what I will do in the few minutes I have, I would like to point out 2 points that I think are timeless, and that's why it's worth to think about it still today. And then I will go back to the question that I think Jan-Erik asked, like, so how can Froebel help us today to resist the current landscape that is shaped by neoliberal thinking, by the global education reform movement. So the 2 ideas I would like to talk about is, the first one is play, of course. So that's what Froebel is really famous for. And as many of you said before, like, it also what made him really unique, because at this time, no one was thinking about play as a means of learning. So play was, if at all, recess, and no one thought like, okay, play can really help us, or can people help to learn something. And Froebel's big idea is that you need to be self-active, right? So you need to, if you really want to learn something, to understand something, it's not done, especially when we talk about young children, by listening to someone. You have to be active. Yeah, and this idea of that by being active, you somehow construct your own self as part of the world, but you also understand the world and how the world is structured and how you are being part of this world. This is one of Froebel's big ideas. And to do that, Froebel said, like, we need to play. And he said, like, we need real play. And I think that's an idea that is very important until today, especially if you look here at the US, where we often speak of play-based learning, which has nothing to do with what is real play, as we all know. Yeah? And very often we can see here, like, people are talking about play, and what it really is, like, it's you're trying to disguise dull memorization, or that you have to somehow just to give it back, yeah, in these times of standardization of learning and teaching. So Froebel's idea that people need to play, I think, and Jan-Erik said that before too, I think it's very often forgotten. So his theory of play is not completely understood, and it's worth it to think about that all the time, that children need to play to really find their place in the world. The second point I think that it really makes it worth to think about Froebel is his insistence on the dignity of the child, and some of you had said that before. So that's something you can find in quite a few of Froebel's texts, that he talks about, well, that children are human beings. Yeah, first of all, they are human beings, and they need to be treated like human beings. And again, if you look at this, as the landscape we have right now, we talk very about they need to be ready for school, then they need to be ready for the career, they need to be ready for college. So we very often forget that, well, but they are children, and they have a right to be children, and they have a right to childhood where they should be allowed to be children. And again, I think that's very important, connected with the idea that everyone has a right to such an education in a childhood. Again, if you look at the current landscape with all the privatization, it goes more and more in this direction, that only the ones who can afford it, or the ones who can play the game, will get high quality education, but not everyone. But Froebel was someone who always insisted on that every child as a human being has a right to education. So why does Froebel matter today? And why should we continue to think with him and to think about things such as early childhood education? So I don't think that he can really help us to find solutions to the issues that are pressing today. You know, we can't read Froebel and then we know, like, okay, we have to do that or that. He can't help in that way. And I don't want to argue that it doesn't make sense to apply Froebelian principles, as especially the work that you are doing here at the Frobo Trust has shown. Yeah, it makes, of course, a lot of sense, but it can't really tell us what we have to do. So why should we still think with him? As I said before, I think it's really helpful to somehow resist the current thinking, to think differently about, or to think about alternatives, and to think, like, how could early childhood education look like in a way that really allows children to be children. So I think Jan-Erik asked this question again, like, okay, you know, how can he help us to resist? I think he can help us to resist by finding alternatives, finding our own voice. I think that's something that early childhood education is still struggling. And I mean, Froebel invented his own language, and I'm not saying we need to invent our own language, but I think we need to insist on the key features of early childhood education that we as a profession find valuable and important. And I think in this sense, Froebel can help us. And I think Lynn said that before, it's a big question. We could talk hours about that, but I think these are a few reasons why Froebel still matters today. You are muted, Teresa. Still. Teresa, we can't hear you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I said those weren't small reasons either, the reasons you gave. Our last speaker tonight is Nicola Kemp, and I want to remind everyone to add your questions if you have it. We're many people here listening, so please do bring in your questions so we can have a good conversation afterwards. Welcome, Nicola.
Thank you. So my response tonight is influenced by some research that I've been doing, which started back in 2019, exploring outdoor provision for babies and toddlers in early childhood education and care settings. And so perhaps unsurprisingly, the first sort of point that I want to highlight that I think is really significant in terms of why Froebel matters is the point that Maria raised around the concern for the very youngest children. So although I think very often in people's minds, Froebel's associated with the kindergarten and perhaps, slightly older preschool children, Froebel absolutely recognised the significance of the earliest period of childhood. He particularly emphasised the importance of the environment in which the youngest children spend time. And in his words, he described them as being an appropriating eye. So this idea that actually they were taking in constantly from the environment in which they spend time. So the senses through which the child experiences the world require that, again, in his words, the surroundings, however inadequate they might otherwise be, should be pure and clear. Pure air, clear light, clear space. He particularly emphasised the importance of time spent from birth in and with the clear, still objects of nature. And I found when I was reading The Education of Man that actually, although he was writing for parents, because when he was writing infants and toddlers, sucklings in his words, would have been within the home environment, it's really interesting just to think about how those ideas might translate in contemporary practice, particularly given the lack of attention paid in both research and practice to babies and toddlers and the experiences of the youngest children. So for me, finding that kind of concern about babies and toddlers and, being careful in terms of how we think about the environments in which they spend time was really significant. The second point is around the interdependence of children and nature. So I think, as has already been mentioned, Froebel recognised the mutuality of human-environment relations. And it's interesting that he calls us to attend what we can offer as well as what we can receive from the world. Again, sort of referring to his words, it's not just about what one can receive and absorb from without, but much more what he puts out and unfolds from himself. And I found that understanding stands in stark contrast with our human-centric contemporary perspective, which focus very much on the human benefits from engaging with nature, rather than asking what's my responsibility towards it. Thinking about practice, I think this demands us to think not only about the health and well-being effects of being outdoors for young children, but also how we can develop these environments to support planetary health. One example that I came across, which I found quite inspirational from the United States, was the Natural Learning Initiative. And this offers a practical example of a holistic perspective. So settings there are considered as land restoration sites, intended to simultaneously promote human health and ecological restoration through a naturalisation or rewilding process. So I think there's lots to think about there in terms of understanding the implications of his thinking within the contemporary context. And then finally, but also related, the role of the adult and the attentiveness, this idea of kind of being attentive and close observation. So his pedagogy is based on close observation of the child and their interests. And this gentle observational approach, I think, provides an interesting contemporary model for us to be attentive and responsive adults who closely observe children in and with nature. But most importantly, I think his pedagogy is unique in that it highlights that two-way learning process. So by focusing on the child, it can actually facilitate learning in both the adult and the child. And I think that's summed up in this idea of come, let us live with our children, that through spending time together with children in an attentive way, we can learn as well as facilitate their learning. And my conclusion is that I think Froebel offers radical wisdom in a time when we need wisdom more than ever. Just a final quote, because you know, I love his words. I know they're not always easy, but all the means are simple and at hand. We see them not, perhaps we do not notice them. And I think that looking back to look forward is possibly the Froebelian message. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Beautiful. Looking back to look forward. Well, I hope everyone listening can look back, because we have to think about all the presentations. We've had 8 amazing presentations. I am absolutely filled with thoughts. We will begin our questions with a question posed to Lynn first. You mentioned the challenge. Where are you, Lynn? There you are. Hi. Yeah, all of our speakers can, I think, put on their cameras now, so we can chime in and answer whatever is, when somebody feels that they have an interesting answer or an answer at all. Lynn, you mentioned the challenges of neoliberalism and its challenges, especially in a neoliberal world as many view it today. My question is, how do practitioners resist this and support Froebelian principles?
It's a really good question, but it also has many different kind of answers, because it depends where you are in a way. But I think the thing that Froebel helped us do was always have children at the heart and encourage practitioners to be very aware of that, where sometimes things are done to children, and it's about kind of constantly challenging that. And I saw in the chat, I think that question came from Rhiannon Ferguson, and I saw in the chat that Helge had responded to that in a way that really it's about practitioners finding their voice and questioning things that happen to children rather than with children. And I know that that's hard. I appreciate the difficulty, but you know, when we look at Giroux's critical pedagogy, you know, or Sasha and I wrote an article on revolutionary critical pedagogy that was great for Sasha and I. We just poured it out and wrote it in a matter of weeks, and it was because it was something inside us, and it's about just constantly questioning. Because really, if we're honest, a lot of practitioners do, sadly, and it's nothing to no condemnation of them, but sometimes they just accept the status quo, and I think they've got to question it. And you know, if we look at, and Helge would be great here, but if we look at Froebel's history, he constantly questioned things that were happening to children and made differences, and it never made him very popular, but he knew it was for the right reasons. Now, I don't know if I've answered Rhiannon's question.
I think so.
I think it's about that constant questioning.
Constant questioning and having children at heart.
Yeah. I
think that's a great answer. Does anyone else have something they want to add to that, or shall I, any other thoughts about Sasha?
I think Lynn said it all when she said that she and I wrote an article together about this. I think it's about having wise companions. And I think in the Froebelian community, we're very fortunate to have, and indeed like tonight, the opportunity to talk with others. And without that opportunity for discussion, debate, challenge, to really make us step out of our own shoes and into others. And children are fantastic at helping us to do that too. It's terribly difficult to gain another way of thinking about the world. And so I heartily recommend dialogue and conversation and finding a critical friend or several critical friends.
Thank you. Our next question, since Froebel clearly is so relevant to the 21st century, how do we go about getting his principles more widely understood so that they can be reflected more widely in our education systems? Whoever feels the Helge.
Yeah, I don't have a real answer to that, but I think the big problem that we are facing is that we are not able to speak and to convince policymakers. So, you know, all these things that we are saying, we all agree on that all the time, at least the people who are here today, but even in our field, you know, we agree on these kind of things. But I think we are struggling over the last decades. I think maybe in the UK you have been more successful over the last years, but at least very often we are struggling to convince people of what we know, what is best for children, how children are learning best. And in all this landscape we are in right now, it's even getting harder. And I think it's also getting harder. I had this experience with my students a few years ago when I showed them a video of what I thought was awful teaching. And they all thought like, it's great. Oh, wow, that's what teaching should look like. Because I think they are going through this kind of standardized learning and teaching and have this idea, this is what teaching is, that someone is doing direct teaching with children, you know. And I think it's been getting only harder and harder because we already has lost almost a generation of teachers who went through that. So I don't have an answer, but I think our big problem is that we are not able to speak to policymakers and to convince them.
Thank you. Any other perspectives here? Christina? You're muted.
Yeah, picking up on a lot of threads coming through everybody's talks about that sense of responsibility towards the environment. I do think that his ideas do speak to the now. So there is a sense that we need to be picking them up and using them as part of that. So as Helge was saying, policy is not listening, but we from the bottom up are feeling angry and we want to change things. And so I think there's something very important about the way he does speak to now.
Thank you. Any other thoughts out there about this? Sasha?
Sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation. I just think that there can be a so-called grassroots movement. I think for many years my aim was to influence policymakers, and I came to the conclusion that it was much more important to work with educators because those are the people who are working with children and families every day. And if there is an early childhood nursery chain in London called London Early Years Foundation, the founder of which, June O'Sullivan, has a phrase, changing the world one child at a time. And I think that's quite apt. I think that is a way of making a difference and a way of creating ripples that perhaps ultimately will change policy because there is such a sway of difference. And I think it's happened in Scotland.
Rather than trying to ask for power, use the power we have.
Yeah.
Sounds like. Thank you. Any other comments on that? We have time for another question. We all agree that Froebel's approach is especially valuable at this time. Yeah, it's kind of the same. We all agree that Froebel's approach is especially valuable at this time of neoliberal-driven educational policy. But how can Froebel's approach have more impact in mainstream education and early years practice? Kind of the same thing. I don't know. Does anyone get any new thoughts connected to that question? It's very similar to the first one. I think we've kind of answered it. Yes, Lynn?
Just a very quick thing. We found years ago when we set up the Froebel CPD course in the University of Edinburgh, fundamentally it was practitioners that were working in kindergarten at the time. But you know, many years on now, and with 550 students each year going through it, we now find that we've got loads of primary practitioners also attending, and we've definitely seen a huge difference in Scotland. So, I suppose what I'm saying is that maybe through training, and again, what Sasha was saying about that community, the Frobo community is very strong in Scotland, and I believe it is in England as well. And I think, you know, there's lots and lots, there's a real Froebelian community in Scotland, and it's certainly not just for one sector. It's certainly not just for the early years. It's definitely spreading. I mean, we're starting to get people that are really interested in secondary now. So, I mean, in that, at the very beginning, we thought, oh, it'd be great to get some primary people in, but that now is not, you know, it's happening very, very easily now.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Can I say something to that?
Yes,
Lynn,
please.
you know, I think, but you are the two big examples right now, like in Scotland and England, maybe, you know, like, for example, in the US, there is no Froebelian movement, right? Even if I think about Germany, there is a very small group of Froebel scholars, but there is no Froebel pedagogy that is implemented in the kindergartens. So it would be really interesting to learn from you how you made that happen and how you continue to make it happen, because from how I see it worldwide, it is not happening.
Do you know, I don't know if this is something, I mean, I work in Cowgate Under 5 Centre, and one of the things that I used to notice, we offered visits to lots of practitioners, and they would, and I mean, we've you know, put it out there that we're a Froebelian setting, our staff are Froebelian trained, and we started, well, we've always attracted lots of visitors, but what we found was that many people were a little bit lost. And I don't know quite how to describe that, but some practitioners were trying to maybe pick a little bit from something else, a little bit from something else, and, you know, different ideas. And you know, we would speak to them and say, well, you know, being a Froebelian really helps us. It gives us kind of strength. We can, any of the directives that are coming, you know, that fit with our principles, fine. If not, we can help them on their way. And you know, there's a real strength. You can courageously denounce things that you do not believe in when you're working with Froebelian principles, I feel. And what happened is we started finding that people were really interested in the courses, and we started off with something like 26, and as I say, it's like over 500 a year that's going through now, and that's about our capacity to deliver. I think we could even get more, and we thanks to the Frobo Trust, we've also started a Froebel Masters that's really successful, and we're really seeing a huge change in Scotland. I mean, Froebel also is in policy documentation, so the national guidance has Froebel scattered all the way through it, so that, you know, so there's been a huge journey, really, I think, and I'm really happy to talk to you about it, Helge.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's very strong.
Jan-Erik.
Yeah, I think, Lynn, what you're pointing to is the need of a practitioner-based organization with connection inside the training education system. And without that, it's not very easy, because most people aren't that interested of history or of, let's say, esoteric theories like Froebel's, because it's also the problem that Froebel's theories are not well documented, not even in Germany. Helmut Heiland has spent his life almost, and a lot of other colleagues, to depict Froebel's thinking, etc. So without what you described, Lynn, I think we are bad off, and your what you describe seems to be a necessary condition to come forward.
The other thing that I think, can I just say, oh, sorry, one thing. Sorry for that.
Well, I maybe know, Vashigo, please.
Well, it's the Frobo Trust. The Frobo Trust offers all these webinars, produces these wonderful pamphlets, all these free resources that go to everybody, that speak to people as well. So I think that having the Frobo Trust there has certainly spread it in England and Scotland and other parts of the UK, and I think the wider world. I mean, I'm off to the Czech Republic in the morning to talk about Froebel.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and I encourage all of our listeners. Several people have asked some questions about Froebel, and I encourage them to go to the Frobo Trust website and find more information. And the next issue, special issue coming out in June, I believe. Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic evening for myself, and I think for everyone out here listening. I look forward to more coming from all of you writers, educators, and researchers. Thank you very much for your work, and thanks for listening, everyone involved, for comments and questions. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.